And we were determined to force the issue of justice for everybody onto the public consciousness. And the total theatrical community, in my mind, seemed to be caught up in that. The producers were involved, the directors, the actors, the writers. We belonged to a sort of blessed confraternity, and we were glad to be comrades and marching forward in the same struggle. We didn't know how thoroughly we were being watched, certainly not in 46, 47, 48.
All of a sudden there emerged this noise. There erupted this group that started to talk about any and all of us who dared to embark on such conduct were unpatriotic and were working towards the worst interests of our home. Our patriotism was to be seriously challenged. And some of us listened to these utterances with complete disbelief. As a matter of fact, it was a huge stretch of the imagination to suggest that those of us who had struggled against racism and oppression and sexism and all the things we struggled against were unpatriotic. And in fact, we knew and felt righteously strong.
There's an old man called the Mississippi. That's the old man I don't like to be. What does he care if the world's got troubles? What does he care if the land ain't free? Old Man River, that old man River, he must know something, but don't say nothing. He just keeps rolling. He keeps on rolling along.
My experience with Paul Robeson was on more levels than one. On the personal level, he was an immediate mentor and a hero for those of us in the theater who wanted to be actors. We wanted to be, to some degree, like he was. He was huge, he was beautiful, he could sing, and he was an athlete, and he was sexy. He had all of the positive things that a young man and a young woman could be inspired by. Paul represented to us that top moment, the top possibility. An artist in every sense of the word, but his art was not only an expression of his own talent or his love for beauty, it was his expression of concern for the rest of us. The artist was the nurturer, the artist was the defender, the artist was the spokesperson.
The artist as revolutionary, context of white supremacy, Gus T. Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's day, Thursday, November 14th, 2019. So I have been told that was the late Ossie Davis, husband to the late Ruby Dee, esteemed theater career themselves. You also heard from Harry Belafonte, many distinguished individuals talking about the life and times of Paul Robeson, and specifically how he was a victim of the so-called Red Scare. Oh, you're a communist. Oh, you're in league with the Reds, non-whites. Oh, you're with the Soviets. We need to make sure you don't get a job, maybe go to jail. Oh, yeah, we're going to mistreat you. And the first person that or one of the first people that they mention in that documentary, Scandalize My Name, is Paul Robeson. I think you can check it out online or probably go to the library or whatever. Might be on Netflix by now. Anyway, this is the book club, our fourth installment on Dr. Gerald Horne's biography on Paul Robeson, the artist as revolutionary. We're picking up in chapter 5, The Tallest Tree in our forest. Just a few pages in. I really want to be quiet so we can get right to the reading this week. They are talking explicitly about the FBI's attack on Paul Robeson. I think I'd said before, given his views, he's traveling, talking about racism and how black people are mistreated. Absolutely, J. Edgar Hoover and powerful race soldiers are going to be very observant about what you, any non-white person like this, is doing. So I will hush and we will get to Paul Robeson, the artist as revolutionary, audio segment number 1.
Subsequently, Robeson and Eleanor Roosevelt were pictured clasping hands, a symbol of the Popular Front or the alliance that fascism had impelled, driving together liberals and radicals. This was part of Robeson's continuing anti-fascism, which also took the form of publicizing Washington's effort to fund the war through bonds, a campaign of which he became a spokesman. This was also part of Robeson being welcomed and embraced by a nervous U.S. ruling elite, worried about the future in light of the challenges launched from Berlin and Tokyo. With the U.S. in a military alliance with the Soviet Union, his solidarity with Moscow was not controversial, but, to the contrary, was useful to the U.S. ruling elite, which could embrace Robeson at the same time muffle its own now compromising anti-communism. Just after the German attack on the Soviet Union, Robeson was addressing a youth congress in Philadelphia, and one fan subsequently recalled proudly how the successful artist, with a few short sentences, made everyone understand what the Soviet Union means to progressive humanity. And then you sang From Border to Border. The mother of the writer, Paul Robeson, was pregnant with him, and as she and the audience left the hall, she turned to her friends and said, "If the baby will be a boy, we'll name him Paul." Such was a riveting potency of Robeson. Thus, Attorney General Francis Biddle, the nation's top law enforcement official, and his wife invited the Robesons to join them at a special concert, an invitation which tendered the day before Germany's brutal invasion of the Soviet Union, which brought the war to a bloodier level. Even Congressman William Dawson of Chicago, one of the few African Americans to serve in that august body, was moved to tell Robeson, "I take pride in your reflected glory." But, as suggested by the aforementioned presence of Lord Mountbatten, Robeson did not neglect the British Empire during this tempestuous time, as evidenced by officialdom in Ottawa thanking him profusely for giving our officers and men the pleasure of hearing you sing for them, a thanks that was to become iconic a few years later when Canada barred him from entry at Washington's behest. Similarly, Jawaharlal Nehru of British India was keen to tell Miss Robeson in 1939 that he had been in the mountains for the last 10 days, as he was trying to escape from the troubled politics of the plains below. It has been delightful, as was his friendship with the Robesons. Months later, Robeson was invited by Caribbean activists in Harlem, led by Jamaicans, to be their honored guest in a rally for self-determination. Though initially settling in Harlem, in a charming apartment building overlooking the Bronx and Yankee Stadium at 555 Edgecombe Avenue, along a bluff with a commanding view, by 1941, the Robeson family were residing in a well-appointed estate in Enfield, Connecticut, 2 hours swift driving north of Manhattan, just outside of Hartford, capital of the Nutmeg State. It was a large Georgian colonial house featuring pillared stucco. Many fine old trees shaded the deftly manicured lawn. There were 12 rooms and 3 baths, with a tasteful living room paneled in burnished mahogany, set off by a large and lushy marble fireplace. There was a tennis court, a swimming pool, a bowling alley, a billiard room, and a hall suitable for both concerts and dances. It was a baronial splendor, well befitting a singer and actor deemed to be at the height of his artistic powers. We are all simply crazy about the country, rural area, and have settled down permanently to country life. The house is divine, said Aslanda Robeson, and exactly suits us and is all much too good to be true. It was very lovely, with the low Berkshire hills at the back and a modest 2.5 acres. Her husband loves the quiet and low gear of the place and flies home for every moment he can spare when on tour. It was really a lovely house, she said despotically, and its only fault is that it looks a bit more impressive than it is. It is very simple, very sturdy, and absolutely livable, which was all true, but simultaneously a downplaying of the exceedingly comfortable lifestyle to which the couple had grown accustomed. Robeson also resumed his touring as a concert artist, a necessity since he decided to turn his back on film and stage production that were both profitable and positive, which in any case were hard to come by. A stunning assemblage of 150,000 heard him in Chicago's Grant Park in July 1940. In September 1940, he joined in Harlem with the novelist Richard Wright and the musicians Hazel Scott and Andy Razif and 3,500 others in a bold attempt to form the Negro Playwrights Incorporated, an effort to produce high-quality theater for the increasingly distressed community. In October of that year, he held his first recital at Carnegie Hall in 5 years. By December, he was singing a different tune, urging workers to join the United Auto Workers in Detroit, a union and a city that were to become emblems for militant solidarity. Within months, he had established a new box office mark in Philadelphia, attracting 7,500 patrons in an appearance with the city's celebrated orchestra. It was then that he received a whopping $125,000 for a 51-city tour. Yet these recitals and concerts too provided no surcease, since he had to confront the dilemma of whether he should perform before racially segregated audiences. In the midst of galvanizing African Americans for a war that some view with skepticism, he was compelled in early 1942 to make a speech at his packed concert in Kansas City, remonstrating angrily about Jim Crow seating. The agent that booked him there apologized almost tearfully, asserting that the uproar caused me a great deal of distress, while pledging to redouble my efforts to avoid situations of this sort for next season. The editor of the local Negro newspaper congratulated Robeson for the stand you took against segregation, since it has spurred the Negro citizen here to wage a campaign against discrimination in our tax-supported buildings. You have given us a good start. Robeson was a kind of Pied Piper of anti-Jim Crow, journeying from city to city, inspiring fellow crusaders, for it was thought if one as affluent as Robeson could protest and sacrifice, then surely others less endowed could. Subsequently, Robeson reflected on this jarring episode. In 1942, at the height of my success, he said in December of 1963, I stood before a packed and enthusiastic audience in Kansas City and said that I regretted having sung to them because my Negro people were segregated in the audience, and that I would never again perform before a segregated audience. And, he stressed, I never have. Nonetheless, this was an uphill climb. Months later, in Baltimore, Robeson was refused permission to sing at the Lyrical Theater because of his insistence that the audience should be desegregated. For despite the best efforts of this and other agents, the terrible spectacle of apartheid seating at his concert was to bedevil Robeson for years to come, causing him unimaginable grief while causing him to redouble his own efforts to extirpate this pestilence. His bold effort to disrupt the status quo also labeled him as a radical, which then in turn caused the Daughters of the American Revolution to bar him from their concert hall. Still, it was the future Negro millionaire, John H. Johnson, then in the infancy of a storied career that would lead him to fame, who saluted his refusal to play Othello in Jim Crow theaters, endorsing the stand which you have taken, which hastened the day when this apartheid was to erode. As a result, Robeson directed his formidable fundraising skill and immense personal magnetism towards anti-Jim Crow crusades. He joined with 8 others in filing a pioneering lawsuit against Jim Crow seating at a San Francisco restaurant. This initiative, including the harbinger of the youth armies of the 1960s that finally broke down the walls of legalized bigotry. The spring of 1942 found him in Tuskegee, Alabama, home of the late symbol of Negro capitulation, Booker T. Washington, but at a confab designed to contradict the latter's path. The Southern Negro Youth Conference was to be scorned after the war as just another communist front, a reflection of the unavoidable point that the Young Communist League played a pivotal role in bringing together a broad front tasked to tackle Jim Crow. But those who came to Robeson's concert for SNYC, including the NAACP's William Pickens and the preeminent U.S. military man Benjamin O. Davis, and the head of the University Washington founded, Frederick Douglass Patterson, were then less concerned about the specter of red credentials as they were moved by the reality of anti-black bias. Yet at the same time, Robeson was being wined and dined by the powerful and working tirelessly to ensure that the U.S. government survived a challenge from fascism. He was being monitored relentlessly by that very same government, nervous about his socialist beliefs. Somehow, a functionary of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, office in Los Angeles, got a hold of a Robeson notebook with scribbling in Chinese, and although the U.S. ostensibly was on the same side as the bulk of China's population then fighting Japanese militarism and imperialism, this discovery was viewed initially with grave suspicion, perhaps because of the rising Chinese Communist Party under the leadership of Mao Zedong. But then the bulldog of the director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, had this document translated and found to his satisfaction that it was clearly of no significance to anyone other than its owner. Actually, a new softer stage in support of anti-communism had been reached because of the US's alliance with the Soviet Union against the Axis powers. Still, there were signs that this was a false dawn at best. If Robeson had been paying closer attention to his personal relationships, he might have detected this. Thus, Walter White and Carl Van Vechten had been instrumental in the remarkable rise of Robeson as an artist, but by the time he was about to depart London, there were indicators that both had become disillusioned with him. "I see Paul has come out in favor of Russia against Finland," said Van Vechten, adding, This is very bad business indeed. Though Robeson had propelled Van Vetchen up the social ladder, introducing him to Lord Beaverbrook, for example, this New Yorker's friendship with the artist was now crumbling. Even as Robeson was standing shoulder to shoulder with the U.S. in his death match with fascism, the U.S. authorities, specifically the FBI, were eyeing him suspiciously. The same year that the FBI exonerated him for daring to scribble in Chinese, this same agency found that he is a member of a number of Communist front organizations, seen as a demerit or worse. It was found questionable that at a fundraiser in Manhattan for Spanish loyalists, he complained of the imprisoning of Earl Browder, the leader of the U.S. Communist Party. It was deemed troublesome that Robeson collaborated with communist filmmakers on a documentary that purportedly included scenes that portray violations of civil liberties in the United States, along with the struggle of the American pioneers with fascism, the struggle of labor unions against company spies, and the gallant fight against Hitler. Though Moscow was then an ally, the FBI blanched when Robeson in concert sang songs in Russian. It was found alarming when a confidential informant asserted that Robeson was a Communist Party member and that he had joined the party after a professional tour in England. It was then that he met Harry Pollitt, a possible reference to British Communist leader Harry Pollitt, who was believed to have converted Robeson to the party. Supposedly, Robeson donated $300,000 to his organization. Apparently, the FBI was unaware, but would have been keenly interested to know that Robeson provided a subsidy of $100 per month for the respected U.S. Negro Communist leader Harry Haywood to finish a major study of Negro liberation. The FBI seemed particularly intrigued by the ties of Robeson that implicated global trends, particularly those involving Moscow. And this was the case even when the USSR was allied with the US and those involving the colonized. It was in 1943 that their agent reported anxiously that Miss Robeson was a personal friend of Nehru and that she had entertained his nieces at her Connecticut estate. Similarly, the FBI found it hard to ignore when Islanda contacted Moscow's emissaries in Washington, inviting them also to her cozy, although far from abstemious, abode. It may have been indiscreet on her part to note that this residence was near extremely important cities now in the defense industries. Still, she urged Maximum Litvinov and his wife, telling them affectionately, "We would love to have you stay with us," and making the two feel special by adding, "We ourselves never entertain," while adding our very secret telephone number. The FBI would have been worried further if they had been able to read the correspondence between Ben Davis, Harlem's communist chief, and Islanda Robeson. The Harlem section of the Communist Party is beginning to break records, he exulted. "We have doubled our membership, securing 400 new members in 3 months, and we've just begun." Robeson and Davis were present at the creation of this tremendous upsurge in radicalism. "Ben and I have first met here in Harlem some 35 years ago," said Robeson at Davis's funeral in 1964. "Often passerby on the avenue would be startled and amazed as Ben and I worked out some American football tactics on the sidewalk, as Davis too starred in this sport at Amherst College before graduating from Harvard Law School." Still, it was easy for Robeson to ignore the ominous clouds that were gathering, for he was still being feted, still being courted by up-and-coming artists, a list that included the poet County Cullen, a leader in the field. "I have a play which I wish you would consent to read," he told Miss Robeson, "since it might interest Paul." Miss Robeson was dismissive of the entreaties made to the couple by the Harlem bard, Langston Hughes. Robeson had no such compunction about collaborating with Richard Wright and the musician Count Basie in working on the song hailing boxer Joe Louis. "I know Joe," he said of the pulverizing pugilist and reigning hero of the Black America, "a warm, likable fellow." "Theodore Dreiser would like very much to talk with you," was another missive Robeson received then, a reference to the premier U.S. novelist and journalist of the naturalist school. In that vein, Robeson was tabbed guest of honor at a dinner in tribute to anti-fascist fighters at the posh Biltmore Hotel in Manhattan that honored another famed writer, Dorothy Parker. Rubbing shoulders with him there were the novelists Thomas Mann and the musicians Benny Goodman and Oscar Hammerstein. Like one hand washing the other, a status cemented in London helped to enhance Robeson's stature at home. "It was a pleasure to see you in Lombard Toledano last Wednesday," was the message passed to Robeson by Nobel laureate Pearl Buck in her reference to one of Mexico's most influential labor chiefs. All good wishes for success against fascism, imperialism, and other ills was then anodyne point delivered to Robeson by Jawaharlal Nehru in early 1942. This was a turnabout for the recently jailed Indian Politico, who earlier was complaining to Miss Robeson after spending a little over 9 months in prison. Evidently, he assumed correctly that the Robesons' influence would be beneficial in convincing London to free him, just as the couple were to prevail upon him in the following decade to use his influence to ensure their U.S. passports would be returned. She had sent him books penned by Richard Wright. Then he requested others by Upton Sinclair so as to better expend his time in prison. This mutuality of literacy interest stemmed from the time that Robeson and Nehru spent together in London, when, in the Indians' astonishment, the interlocutor began to spontaneously recite poetry in Hindi in order to demonstrate the commonalities in speech patterns between those who spoke this language and those who spoke a language colloquially referred to in the U.S. as Black English. The popularity of Robeson in South Asia also encompassed the teardrop-shaped island off of India's southern coast, then known as Ceylon, now known as Sri Lanka. East African soldiers stationed there celebrated Robeson's 47th birthday during the war. Though organized by islanders, Robeson, described locally as a legend in his own time, was feted fittingly in a concert that featured music from both the Sinhalese and Swahili traditions. This may shed light on why Eslanda Robeson was told subsequently that she might be surprised to know to what extent the public here in Ceylon followed the career of both you and your famous husband. Unsurprisingly, it was then that the formerly jailed leader, Nehru, asked Robeson plaintively, "Is there any chance of coming to India?" Robeson's prominence was being taken for granted. When a distinguished U.S. Negro journalist, P.L. Prattis, wrote in 1944 that Robeson had been adjudged to be one of the 12 great intellects of the world today, this hardly caused a raised eyebrow or a ruffle of dissent. Perhaps this encomium was bestowed because of his linguistic ability, coupled with what was then seen positively as his friendship with Moscow, the latter being suggestive of political insight, both of which were indicative of intellectual capability. As such, the alma mater of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Morehouse College in Atlanta, strained to extend an invitation to Robeson, requesting that he honor them by accepting their offer of an honorary degree. This event in the late spring of 1943 was a festive occasion in this otherwise grim citadel of Jim Crow. Benjamin Mays, who was to serve as Dr. King's mentor, was effusive, terming Robeson's appearance a great occasion. People were standing in large numbers, and we erected a loudspeaker and put chairs on the campus for the people who could not get in. There were many outside. Dr. Mays proclaimed that Robeson gave an excellent address, and he received a grand ovation. Robeson sang, and of course the house literally went wild with applause. Yes, he concluded with satisfaction, those who have seen Morehouse commencement over a period of 40 or 50 years declare this to be the best the college has had. Scrambling to keep up, Howard University in Washington, D.C., the self-proclaimed capstone of Negro higher education, then unanimously voted to confer upon Robeson an honorary degree. What Howard and Morehouse were recognizing was that Robeson's star continued to ascend, bringing eminence to those campuses when he arrived. This was particularly the case when he received his signature role depicting Othello, first in his hometown of Princeton, then to the apex of the theater that was Broadway, Manhattan. He had traveled a long way from his home on the corner of Green and Witherspoon streets in this university town. Bursting with pride, the town that once shunned him now boasted of his triumphs, particularly in London. He twice filled the Albert Hall to its 10,000 capacity and gave a command performance at St. James Palace before the Prince of Wales, while, this past summer, it was said in August 1942, he broke attendance records in Philadelphia and at Lewisham Stadium in Manhattan. One critic was disarmed by Robeson's appearance at the latter venue, since few concert stars, theretofore, had been able to pack Lewisham Stadium, and you can count on one hand the number of Negroes attending and still have 3 fingers left. But not so now, for things have really changed with the arrival of Robeson. For he was able to attract diverse audiences, particularly African Americans, introducing them to languages and cultures which many were unfamiliar, internationalizing their consciousness and making it easier for them to join with less hesitancy and reluctance an anti-fascist crusade. There had been expressions of anti-Jewish fervor in Harlem as an outgrowth of fascist influence, but Robeson helped to undermine it, asserting no Negro would dare be anti-Semitic in front of me. Hebrew music moves me very deeply, he confided to the BBC. One day, I was mistaken for an Orthodox Jew, or one of the Falashas of Africa. I grew a beard for Othello, and as he had hopped into a subway train, A chap with a beard began talking to me in Hebrew, and Robeson replied accordingly. Then suddenly, his face breaks into a big grin, and he says, "You're not one of us. You're not one of the Falashas. You're Paul Robeson." Still, it was acting on Broadway in Othello that propelled Robeson to ever greater heights of popularity, making it less likely that he would be found on subways. Time magazine, the arbiter of mainstream opinion, proclaimed in 1943 that Robeson was probably the most famous living Negro. He went to London, conquered it. He conquered half the cities of Europe, probably an underestimate. As for Moscow, which this journal was to bludgeon repeatedly after the war ended, Robeson was cited as saying, "I felt I might have functioned there better than any place else in the world." He now received a handsome $1,500 per week performing in Othello, which was a fraction of what he can earn singing at $2,000 or $2,500 a night. For Othello, he lost 35 pounds and now weighs a selvage 230. Before departing London, it had occurred to Eslanda Robeson that reviving this role in the U.S. would catapult her spouse to the commanding heights of his craft. She eagerly made casting suggestions, observing that a lot depends on the selection of Desmona character in determining the play's success. Miss Robeson proved to be prescient. The official premiere was held in Philadelphia, with Robeson in brilliantly colored robes gliding across the stage. The future renowned jurist Raymond Pace Alexander was among those in attendance, and he too, like the audience as a whole, leapt to his feet when the curtain descended, as all assembled erupted in a wild display of applause. The next day, an impressed Leopold Stokowski, the well-known conductor, met with Robeson, signing him to a quite substantial contract, making him the first black person to appear as a concert artist before the eminent orchestra. Othello, the story of an African who had served the state valiantly but was traduced nonetheless, resonated because of the echoes it provided of Robeson's own life, campaigning for a government unwilling to confront the Jim Crow that bedeviled him. One of Hollywood's main moguls, Walter Wagner, was among the legions who expressed his admiration and regard for Robeson, adding, your accomplishments in and out of the theater knows no bounds." One fan of Robeson was among those who raved about his performance, terming it one of the great Shakespearean productions of all time, noting how Robeson was able to draw upon the rage you felt at the violent methods used by white players to keep you off the football team, and you have found it in a model for the rage Othello must have felt. Yet, despite the enormous success, potential producers were frightened, fearing that a domestic audience would shun a tragedy involving an interracial love scene. Tension was in the air as a result, as Robeson had predicted when he performed the role in London years earlier. "I make myself believe I am Othello, and I act as he would act," was Robeson's simple explanation for the play's groundbreaking success, and an indication of a style of method acting that would sweep through Hollywood in coming years. As evidenced by the aforementioned cities, Princeton, Philadelphia, Tuskegee, Washington, Atlanta, Kansas City, Robeson was engaging in a punishing travel regimen, often traveling thousands of kilometers by train, a pattern that was to take a toll as his age advanced inexorably. By the time the U.S. entered the war, he was 43 years old. In 1942 alone, his itinerary involved train travel from Manhattan to Dayton, Ohio to Chicago, to Pasadena, California, a distance of 3,000 kilometers, all within days. It was then that his good friend and better comrade, Ben Davis, about to be elected to the New York City Council as a communist, bumped into Robeson and walked away worried. "He's well, and I tried in the space of a few minutes," he told Aslana Robeson, "to press upon him the necessity for rest. I have ways, however, of pressing harder," he added enigmatically. Perhaps Davis could have persuaded Robeson to curb his consumption of what an astonished journalist termed his one real weakness. In other words, his devouring of ice cream by the quart in one sitting. Tellingly, it was reported in 1944 that the moment Robeson sits down, he lights a cigarette, a habit not widely seen as then as ultimately debilitating. "I work harder in one performance of Othello," he said, "than I ever did in 3 concerts." Just before departing London, a worried Aslanda was urging her spouse to adopt a new diet and get his weight down. The once solid, broad-shouldered Adonis gradually got so big right before my eyes that all semblance of that grand figure has long since disappeared under bulk. Robeson got bigger and I got madder and madder, an unsubstantial predicament for both sides. On a visit to Manhattan, old friends who had not seen him of late compared him to an ox. So he got mad, and as was his tendency. This anger fueled a prompt downsizing of his bulk. As his success in competitive sports suggested, Robeson could ascend to great heights when challenged. Moreover, the fury he displayed in portraying Othello was a partial product of being able to access an inner rage fueled by the indignity of Jim Crow. But the question loomed. As domestic and global tensions rose and Robeson was targeted, would he be able to remain healthy? Part of Robeson's regimen that he could be exhausting was his continuing, almost maniacal study. He was a prodigious reader, going through 7 books a week. Studying Swahili and Yiddish were on his agenda in the early 1940s. And, according to a bedazzled reporter, he broke the back of Chinese in 3 months. He started studying Norwegian at 8 o'clock one morning, said one amazed journalist, and was writing it by 6 the same evening. He once turned down a 50-week radio engagement because he was in the throes of learning Chinese. He had embarked, it was announced in 1943, on the formidable task of learning at least one example of every language group in the world, with groups still to be tackled, including Turkish, Mexican Indian, Hindustani, and Georgian. To that end, he usually wakes up at 7:30 a.m., reads or studies languages for half an hour, and goes back to sleep again until about 10:30, as Othello is a strenuous part. Then he sleeps while in the afternoon too, before his 5 p.m. dinner. His immense erudition did not extend to his diet, since his favorite meal is scrambled eggs, sausages, and coffee. When he has a cold, he drinks scotch. And between the acts of Othello, he needs a slight glass of champagne. Besides language study, he relaxed by indulging in a similarly complex game that is chess, and has a remarkable collection of chess books, though he never really mastered this complex game. He also enjoys visiting night spots to listen to music, talk, relax, and sometimes dance. He loves boogie woogie, both to hear and sing himself. In other words, Robeson was a classic case of burning his candle at both ends. There was an intense study that a would-be philologist and the sampling of earthly delights, then the hallmark of celebrated performers. How long could he maintain the intense mandated by the demanding, though incongruent, rims of philologist and performer? Upon showing up at his favorite watering hole, Robeson may have befuddled those assembled, according to a bemused journalist, by absent-mindedly having donned two different socks, or perhaps a blue jacket and a black pair of trousers, considered a fashion faux pas. The affluent Robeson was always forgetting to carry along money, indivisible in some of the joints where the music he liked was played. Robeson was often to be found at Manhattan's Savoy, where revolutionary trends in music, subsequently denoted as beat bop, were then being honed. Robeson was there very often, as he recalled it, in order to hear Count Basie, as I had often heard Chick Webb and Ella Fitzgerald. He was often downtown, too, to hear Don Shirley and Bach, then up to Manhattan Casino to hear Charlie Parker, the godfather of the new music. There, he would get twisted around trying to dance to those offbeat riffs. Then, down to the Apollo to hear Dizzy Gillespie take flight. Hearing the tinkling of the ivory keys of Thelonious Monk really floored me, as did the comparable Duke Ellington. As was his wont, Robeson sought to make linkages between and among his artistic pursuits, observing that the modern jazz quartet made a lasting impact with the Elizabethans, and the Duke Ellington himself caught up with Shakespeare. Subsequently, he spoke glowingly of W.C. Handy, a great character and a musician, the daddy of the blues, adding, "I knew him well, for in his Joe Turner blues, as he said to me, the original of the chorus is probably the prototype of all blues, and it was sung all over the South." Robeson recounted how, when I was a young man in Harlem, just round the corner from where I lived was a cafe. The musicians would go there after the nightclubs closed around 2 a.m. I remember when I was in a show, I'd go along and we'd have eggs and bacon. People would improvise on their instruments and sing, and many of the great songs were written that way. For me, it was spirituals on Sunday morning, but on Saturday nights, I rocked. Who rocked with me? Well, there was Fats Waller, Billie Holiday, Chick Webb, Louis Armstrong, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, and many more. And among the youngsters who had came along later was Lena Horne, Sammy Davis. I remember a young girl coming in one night. We couldn't see much of her through the tobacco smoke, but when she sings, we stop and we listen. She sang "A Tisket, a Tasket," and the Count says to me, "Where's she from?" Her name was Ella Fitzgerald. She says, "I'm going to Carnegie Hall." Later, Robeson explained that Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker are not new names to me. I have heard them both play on several occasions and have been both stimulated by their imaginative creations and a little astounded by their incredible technique and musicianship. Still, he sought to apply his critical intelligence to this field, warning that the big jazz boom, which started around 1936, meant that the music became big business. Thus, this musical trend deserves serious attention, and perhaps in years to come, they, Gillespie and Parker, will be regarded somewhat as Debussy and Stravinsky are now regarded by modern musicians. Though accepted as conventional wisdom today, at least in rarefied circles, then Robeson's remarks were quite typically controversial. He was drawn into a spirited discussion between an advocate of bebop and a defender of the old New Orleans style. The predecessor, I sat quietly, drinking in this highly specialized talk, taking no sides, seeing merit in both sides. At a reasonably safe distance from the New Orleans pro-Dixielanders, I am grateful of the arrival of Messer, Gillespie, Parker, and their New York-based colleagues. Despite such diversions, he found plenty of time to devote to the organization he had helped to found and subsidize, the Council on African Affairs. It was during the war that Kwame Nkrumah, then residing in the U.S., and Amy Ashwood Garvey, former spouse of the then deceased Jamaican leader, listened raptly as Robeson spoke about the colonized continent and what was to be done to alter this state of affairs, a decolonized prospect hardly endorsed by the prime U.S. ally in London. This was accompanied by a massive 46th birthday party for him in 1944, featuring Duke Ellington, the musician, Joe Louis, the boxer, and Richard Wright, the novelist, designed to raise funds for the Council on African Affairs, CAA. The coordinator of this tribute was the prominent writer Lillian Hellman, and joining her in providing an avalanche of kudos were Cab Calloway, W.C. Handy, Walter Houston, Lucky Roberts, and Ed Sullivan. When the preeminent baseball slugger George Babe Ruth sent him best wishes for this crowded gathering, it signaled Robeson's exalted status in the U.S. stratosphere. But signifying the breadth of Robeson's appeal, Kwame Nkrumah, soon to be Ghana's founding father, was also among the endorsers of this event. 13,000 persons tried to squeeze into the crowded locale, and 5,000 had been turned away for lack of room. Vice President Henry A. Wallace, soon to be defrocked in favor of Harry S. Truman, delivered fulsome praise, as did the actor Edward G. Robinson and the labor leader Sidney Hillman. Mary McLeod Bethune, an acclaimed Negro educator, referred to him in awestruck terms as the tallest tree in our forest, a label that was to stick to him for decades to come. A visibly touched Robeson, head bowed, occasionally dabbing at his moist eye with the handkerchief, spoke movingly about his appreciation and his sacred cause, the CAA and the liberation of colonized Africa. This was in Manhattan, but it was more than 3,000 kilometers westward in Los Angeles months later when the CAA joined with celebrities in honoring Robeson and raising funds for his favorite causes. Those lavishing pleasantries upon him were the famed actor and chanteuse Lena Horne, who was explicit in her love and gratitude to him for making the path so clear with the brilliant light of your artistry. Also joining in the Amen chorus were Dalton Trumbo, perhaps Hollywood's most creative screenwriter and a talented novelist besides, who along with Robeson was to be persecuted after the war ended. Still, also on the list of those celebrating Robesons were distinguished actors such as Gregory Peck, Boris Karloff, Gene Kelly, and Danny Kaye. The year of this celebration, 1945, was to be yet another turning point for Robeson, his nation, and the world. May witnessed the Allies' victory over Germany in Europe, and August marked the horrific conclusion of the war in Asia with the atomic bombing of Japan. Finally, conditions were safe for Robeson to return to Europe. We left New York August 1st, said his accomplice, Lawrence Brown, with a crossing of 29 hours to Paris, and were on the go ever since. We have worked 3 performances, one for some GIs and a radio recording. Then we will cover France, Germany, and perhaps Austria. Robeson picked the concentration camp at Dachau as one of his initial stops. I stood in Dachau in 1945, he said a few years later, and saw the ashes and bones of departed victims, speaking of the most dastardly concentration camp established by the hated Nazis. I might have seen the ashes of some of my brothers in Groveland, Florida, just the other day, or in Martinsville, Virginia, a few months back. He wrote in 1952, referring to recently inflamed sites arguing the destruction of black life. However, Dachau was not the only shock that Robeson received in Europe. He was astounded by the anti-Negro and pro-German attitude of our American troops there. I would have never believed it if I had not come abroad, he said. He spoke with U.S. officers and found them to be anti-Russian and convinced that the war with Russia was inevitable. He was similarly astonished to find that these men seemed equally determined to weaken the Labour Party in Britain and Social Democrats in Europe generally. J. Edgar Hoover was informed that Robeson was disturbed to find that Army officers and State Department officials were in open collaboration with Nazis and fascists in Czechoslovakia. Robeson said that he knew this to be true because he was with these officers and officials in Prague while making a tour. Robeson had a front row seat in inspecting the U.S. military in Europe, an outcome that the brass himself guaranteed when Major General Frank Keating invited him to their inner sanctum, requesting that he sing for the troops. Robeson chose not to retreat or yield since he had a sense of what he and his comrades were up against. It was also in 1945 that he addressed a large gathering in Los Angeles of the Joint Anti-Fascist Refugee Committee, where $17,000 was raised for those who had managed to escape the ravages of Europe. It was there that he enunciated the creed that was to animate his life for years to come. We are standing at the crossroads of history, he said. The American people do not entirely understand that we can have fascism here unless we learn to use our productive forces for the benefit of all people. We can't wait for fascism to die out and the oppressed peoples of the world will not wait. Eagerly capturing his words were agents of the FBI, who thought that they had reason to believe, as was to be said later, that actually Robeson had in mind becoming the Black Stalin, a destiny the agency was bent on circumventing.
Context of white supremacy. In the first audio segment, on location today, I am right across the street from Elliott Bay Bookstore, which is in the middle of Capitol Hill, basically downtown Seattle, about a mile, maybe a little less from the shed. I am here because they are doing book signing for a sort of sad victim of white supremacy, a book about white supremacy in Seattle's whole system. And so I had to get closer because that event is happening in a little less than 2 hours. So we had to go to the club a little early. I had to come out of my cave so that I can get right at the beginning of the event. Run in, back and record, and back and ask. So it's sad to have guests with us on the program. That is why it's a little noisy, normally be on location. The counter-crime continues to record and share. Anyway, get to that. We are with the book club, and it's saying the FBI eagerly capturing words of Paul Robeson. That's 1940s. That's before they have all the wonderful gadgetry of the 21st century. Even then, right there, listening. That is the system of white supremacy. Folks have thoughts, commentary they would like to contribute early today. The number again is 605 3133 51664. The code 5664 943. Count. Press star 661 if you would like to participate. That number again, 605 3133 51664. The code 5664 943. Count. Press star 661 if you would like to participate. Much obliged in Chicago, much reading, retired firefighter, his lead as well. Any other folks would like to join us with a narration, but the conclusion, just drop an email, thanks to Chicago, heavy lifting this week. Where this week, hopefully we didn't mess up. Listeners, readers, the change in time, and all of that coming book signing. Go down later this evening. Let's see, retired firefighter should be with us on that. If you have comments to share. Proceed.
I'm just tuning in, but I can say, and probably others can hear it also, that you are very distorted right now.
Any better, retired firefighter, or about the same?
You're back to perfection.
Oh, awesome. Hopefully it'll.
Now, what were you saying? and what page are we on?
We stopped at the end of chapter 5. That's where the audio segment concluded. End of chapter 5. That's what we'll pick. Well, we'll pick
the
up.
End of it.
Yes,
okay.
Sir.
Tallest tree in the forest.
Yes, sir. And we'll pick up on Black Stalin very beginning for the second audio segment. And I didn't have any commentary on the first audio segment, just explaining that we are on a little early today because I am on location.
Yeah, I understood that. I just remembered it when I set my phone to 8 o'clock, and as soon as it came on, the program was already on. Somebody was reading it, and my mind went to, I remember Gus saying that he had to have an early program, and that's why I was just tuned in a few minutes ago. Yeah, but Yeah, I mean I would say with the from my reading of the probably most of the first part of the reading, it's beginning to get more and more interesting. At the end, you see whereas now white people in global law of their version of law enforcement uh, is paying attention to him now, which I would say from a standpoint of what an enemy would what a adverse faction would do with anybody of Mr. Robeson's capabilities. You're talking about somebody that can speak the lot of a lot of languages in the world, and at the same time, with that ability, be able to speak out against the system of racist white supremacy. Yes, he would be watched and diagnosed in the different things that these quote unquote agencies do. That's for sure. Because I would say I can't think of anybody of that magnitude, not so much about Paul Robeson, the quote unquote star, whatever that means, but someone that is able to be that dedicated to study languages and at the same time have something that people call talent. And with that notoriety that was bestowed upon him, he has the nerve to want to solve the system of racist white supremacy, or at least say some things and do some things that would be against it. So, of course, he is definitely going to be spied upon. That's for sure. And I would suspect in this book is more to come, a lot more to come on that subject. And that's all I have to say right now. Thank you.
Much obliged, retired firefighter. One of our narrators, our other narrator, Henry in Chicago, with us as well. Much obliged for the heavy lifting this week. If you have commentary, proceed.
Greetings, Justin. Greetings to all the callers and listeners. We started to go into the FBI's, associating Mr. Robeson with the Communist Party, and you start to see some of his white friends kind of fall off.
There's a little bit of distortion in your line. I'm not sure if it's just me, but just a little bit.
Okay, hold on. Let me see if does this work better for you?
Still a little bit of we can. I'm not sure what it is. If you wanna hang up and dial back in, we'll see if that clears it out. It's just like a little flutter. I'll look for you on the switchboard.
Okay.
All right. So we'll give Henry in Chicago a couple seconds. I'll give out the number again. 605-313-5164. The code 564-943#. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. And we should be here on Monday. If you want to do a little more reading or researching, Laura Wexler, white woman, suspected racist. She authored the book A Fire in the Canebrake. It is about the Moores Ford Bridge lynching, 1946 in Georgia. Pregnant black female was killed in addition to 3 other people, 2 black males, 2 black females, mass killing, cowbell involved, of course. They are talking about this case now and about Laura Wexler specifically because she is now the plaintiff because they're trying to find someone to adjudicate this case. They think some of the white killers are still alive and can be prosecuted. There's no statute of limitations on murder. But she should be with us on Monday. We'll be talking about that case, her book, and the ongoing efforts for justice. Monday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Just do a little research. Laura Wexler, what is she all about? Okay, Henry in Chicago should be back with us. Let's try it again.
Okay, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do I sound a lot clearer now?
I guess give us another sentence. Let's make sure.
Okay. If you don't understand racism, white supremacy, and how it works, everything else will confuse you.
I think we can manage. Still a little flutter, but it's better than it was before. So, absolutely. Let's
Okay.
proceed.
Okay. All right. So we're starting to get into the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, legendary race soldier, associating Mr. Robeson with communism, and you start to see his so-called white friends kind of fall off. Mr. Van Betjen, who says that it's very bad business, and other people kind of shy away from him because of his association with, the so-called communists. Interesting in regards to when they got into his health. Didn't know much about it, but this book kind of points out how much Robeson was kind of straining on himself, trying to do acting, trying to do singing, trying to work against the system of white supremacy, and it is taking a toll not only on his marriage, as it was stated early in the book, but also on his health. Robeson was eating ice cream and smoking cigarettes and drinking scotch and stuff like that. And his friends saying that he was a lot heavier at one point. Obviously, if you're a world-class athlete, and I've seen this with a lot of athletes, when you kind of like let yourself go, you tend to keep some of those pounds that you gain when you start working out. And I can imagine Robeson, who as mentioned was a world-class athlete who didn't exercise anymore, kind of let his body weight go. But also too, with all the extensive studying that he's doing, but at the same time not getting enough sleep, which I kind of noticed because he's out in clubs listening to music and burning what was the term that they use on here, burning both ends of the candle. So basically he wasn't getting much sleep, so he was taking naps during the day. Don't know how healthy that is. It's always recommended to get a full night's sleep, especially when you're studying, just so the information can process better. So that kind of probably took a toll on him as well. Very talented in learning languages, but at the same time, if you're processing this, your brain's going to have some sort of rest at some point or another. So it's always good to study, but at the same time, when you study, you have to get sleep. And this, causes stress in a lot of people who, are in, college. And I've heard stories of law students and medical students, going, basically having nervous breakdowns because they don't get any rest. So that's always a thing that you should always do. And I think that's all I have right now in my life.
Much obliged. Henry in Chicago, narrating for the week. Other folks, if you have comments or questions, *61, I will nab you from the switchboard. Let's see. Some of the notes, things that stood out for me this week. Again, that documentary that we started with, Scandalize My Name. You can check it out and, see some of the more details about how Robeson was mistreated during this time period and hear some of his contemporaries, Harry Belafonte and the like, talking about his life and how he was persecuted. I appreciated Global System of White Supremacy. They were talking about earlier part of Chapter 5 that Mr. Robeson had gone to Ottawa, Canada to do a performance. He traveled all over the world, and they were so thankful for him coming there. And Dr. Horne points out the irony that some years later, he would be barred from visiting Canada at the request of Washington. And that's just the system of white supremacy. Minister Malcolm X was barred from entering France some years later, where black people, any victims of racism, white supremacy, black or no, white people can deny you access. You see that now with the so-called border crisis. The entire planet being dominated by racism, white supremacy. You can find out really quick you might not be allowed to even cross the street. Greater confinement. That's what Mr. Fuller calls it. Next. They used the metaphor. They said Robeson was kind of a Pied Piper of anti-Jim Crow journeying from city to city, inspiring fellow crusaders, for it was thought if one as affluent as Robeson could protest and sacrifice, then surely others less endowed could. I thought that was really important, and they talked about how much it upset Mr. Robeson. He would go out to give a performance, and they would have so-called Jim Crow seating, racist seating. Black people couldn't be there at all. They'd have to sit in the back and what have you. We've heard that many times. That was in Warmth of Other Suns, Isabel Wilkerson, where she talked about how the black people, they had to be up in the crow seats, so they'd have some other tacky racist name, or either the white people would throw popcorn on them and trash while they were in the theater. Lots of this sort of thing. In my view, it again shows the power of black self-respect. Mr. Robeson, he could have easily made his money. Oh, well, racism is tough. Oh, well, I'm going to get my money. What is it? He was making over $100,000. Got his 50-city tour. He could have said, hey, I'm going to make my money. I'll complain about this later. No. Some things are more important than a few nickels, or a lot of nickels in this case. Black self-respect, again, and how that can influence other people, just them seeing, hey, this fella here, this lady here, she's willing to make a sacrifice. She is willing to take a stand against the system of racism, white supremacy. If she can do that, if he can do that, maybe I should be doing that too. I've seen where that sort of thing can happen over and over too. Next, says, talking about the same thing, fighting against racist seating at his concerts, while causing him to redouble his own efforts to extirpate this pestilence. His bold effort to disrupt the status quo labeled him as a radical, there's that word again, radical, militant, which then in turn caused the Daughters of the American Revolution to bar him from their concert hall. I say it again, it is greater confinement. Might be barred from going to Canada, might be barred from crossing the street. Never can tell. The system of white supremacy and the Daughters of the American Revolution, again, do not minimize the role of white women in maintaining this system. I think the Daughters of American Revolution have come up repeatedly in different ways in reinforcing this system. Let's see. It kind of slipped back into a little bit of the showoffism, again, going into the people who raved and had great things to say about Mr. Robeson. And I appreciate that some of that is very much needed because, you know, it's 2020 basically, and you do have a lot of people who do not know anything at all. I think racists, they do a great job at particularly black people who try to fight against racism, white supremacy. They can totally obliterate your name. You never existed. And that is the case for Paul Robeson. A lot of people don't know anything about what he did or the COINTELPRO attack against him. So I think it's important to show his global stature, not this just that he was a big icon here in the States, that he was an international icon. So I appreciate that. But also I do think some of that is kind of the show-offism of just, you know, look at all the cool people that I know and who think I'm fly and who love my music and that sort of thing. That can't happen in the system. Now, the nitty-gritty. The FBI COINTELPRO involvement, I didn't know how prominently that was going to be featured in the book, but I'm so appreciative that Dr. Horne is spending a great amount of time on that and now weaving that into the body of the text. This is something I've mentioned before. We talk about racial matters. Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly's text, he has the portion talking about where some black people who had less than $35 in their bank account, and they were victims, targets of the COINTELPRO campaign. So you can imagine someone like Paul Robeson. This is another reason why I say consistently, you don't have to be a so-called militant. You don't have to be a radical. Mr. Robeson's not talking about going out and let's get some guns. I'm going to take all the proceeds from Othello and Porgy and Bess and all my theater performances. I'm going to take all that money and I'm going to get us rifles and guns and we're going to go out and kill some crackers. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about, hey, we're going to get better working conditions and white workers of the world unite. Black workers, that's what he's talking about. It's, we got a dangerous nigger here. Better watch him.
Like, you never know. If you're a black person, anything might be enough to be on the radar of race soldiers, and sometimes you don't have to do anything at all. But this is somehow a functionary of the Federal Bureau of Investigation office in Los Angeles got a hold of Robeson's notebook with scribbling in Chinese. Even that, somehow a functionary, in my view, it would be he was probably being targeted. You're traveling, you're speaking, you're on all these plays, you're making a lot of, way more. This is Depression era. You're making all this money and traveling in an era where a lot of white people don't even have the ability to do this. And then you got the audacity to talk about racism from time to time. Oh, yeah, we got a dangerous nigger here. Probably been keeping tabs on him for a long time. John Patash's book, he talked about how, in his view, the evidence suggests they were monitoring Tupac Shakur from the time that he was a child, waiting on the possibility that he might decide to be an attempted counter-racist. Why wouldn't we think they could be doing the same thing for Paul Robeson? You got some of the same people involved. Continuing. Let's see. I thought when they talked about Morehouse displaying an honorary degree, the same thing. We're in a system of racism, white supremacy. These black, so-called black universities, Morehouse, Howard, these are white-controlled, white-dominated. Today, they can give you an honorary degree. In fact, when they mentioned Morehouse and Howard, I was reminded immediately of Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. Today, we can allow you to teach here. Next week, you better get out of here. Get an office somewhere else. We're not going to allow you to teach that nonsense here. Upset the good white people who fund this university. Same thing, I am sure, happened to Mr. Robeson. Today, you get an honorary degree. Next week, we better not catch you on this campus. Get on out of here. Have white people upset at us, too. Let's see. I thought of Mr. Fuller, too. He has a great audio lecture from some years back talking about all the honorary degrees that get piled up for black people that really don't amount to anything, that might be more show-offs than those honorary degrees. Let's see. The Othello, it's his Eslanda Robeson, Mr. Robeson's wife, when she was saying that she thought him coming back to the States and doing Othello, that would further enhance his career, just again, for a black actor. I guess it's Scandal, 21st century. Back then, it's Othello. Guess who's coming to dinner? That's the best you can hope for. Get a role where you can play in some sort of tragic arrangement with a white man. The Hate You Give, book form 2. Continuing. When they got into him coming back to Chicago and him doing all the traveling, I think Henry in Chicago pointed that out in terms of health and wellness. I was kind of surprised. Not as surprised as the COINTELPRO, but being so dominant this week, but the health and wellness, talking about, him traveling all this and how that took a toll on his health. And then them getting into the diet. Oh, my goodness. The ice cream consumption and him gaining all that weight. Counter racism. The protest begins with self-care. All that dairy in the ice cream cannot be good for your health, in my view, particularly for black people. That cannot be good, just wolfing down all that ice cream, sugar and dairy and fat. Nothing can be good about that. I can totally understand why you would gain all that weight, and that would just further contribute, in my view, to the erosion of health when your weight starts to get really, really high over what your natural weight should be, particularly if you're someone like Mr. Robeson, who a world-class athlete, as was stated by Henry in Chicago. You are not supposed to have all that excess weight on your frame. Your heart feels that, having to carry around all those extra poundage and get blood through your heart. That's going to weigh on your blood pressure, your breathing, everything. You're just your bones in general, having to lug all that extra weight around when you are someone who is supposed to be athletic. Svelte. Remember they talked about that when they had the naked statue of him earlier in the book, and they talked about, oh my gosh, he's so virile, strong, young, Mr. Robeson. Wow. Not supposed to be losing that just because you are, past 35 or something. You're not supposed to be falling apart. Let's see. And they went into so much detail about that. I was really shocked. They're calling him names, and his wife is getting on him, and he's smoking all that, drinking all that alcohol. Doesn't that moron get on this program and say that all the time? Sobriety would be best. That's another way you can pack on a whole lot of pounds, drinking all that alcohol. That's just empty calories, empty sugar,
Empty calories, empty sugar. That hits a whole lot of it. Drinking water. Talk about that on the program a whole lot. Let's see. Next, something just seemed odd, him using real life illustrations of how white people tormenting him and channeling that on stage into his roles as Othello or whatever other roles that he's taking on. I do think it's important if this is what they're labeling as method acting, where you can draw on real life inspiration to help you get into character. If Robeson is someone who ushered that into Hollywood, wow, he should be credited for that. I mean, my goodness. But that is kind of, I mean, wow, like redirecting from being terrorized, and I'm going to use that as a part of entertaining white people, how they have terrorized me in life. Like, wow. And continue to terrorize me. Let's see, next. I again felt a little bit of show-offism. They were talking about his birthday, and they said Babe Ruth sent him best wishes again. I totally get it, showing his prominence. That would, be comparable, I guess, modern day, particularly if it's someone, a prominent a white person like the Kardashians or someone, a President Trump, I don't know, sent, this person an Instagram or a text or tweeted out, happy birthday to such and such, or congratulations on your new accomplishment and whatever it is, and showing that. But again, it just seems like that, wow, even a lot of white people just really adored and thought a lot of Paul Robeson and wanted to be a part of his birthday celebration and such. Let's see. I thought it was important, again, non-white people, we are the ones who are confused about racism, white supremacy, and still learning. They said that Dachau was not the only shock that Robeson received in Europe. He was astounded, look at that word use, astounded, not prepared for what he saw, by the anti-Negro and pro-German attitude of our American troops here. Why would he be surprised about anyone who is classified as white disliking Negroes and supporting Nazi Germans? I wouldn't care if they were whites in the U.S., whites in Australia, whites in France, whites in the 21st century, whites today, November 14, 2019, who are anti-Negro and pro-German, pro-Nazi, in fact. Why should that be a surprise if you understand what it means to be white, if you understand racism, white supremacy? Rhetorical question. Let's see. And immediately after that portion, it's on the same paragraph, it says J. Edgar Hoover was informed that Robeson was disturbed to find that Army officers and State Department officials were in open collaboration with Nazis and fascists in Czechoslovakia. Again, this is in the 1940s. No Twitter, no internet, unless I've been misinformed. Everybody doesn't have a cell phone, but white people might have some unjust networking around the world. Uh-oh. We got an uppity Negro here in Czechoslovakia. Better keep tabs on him. Get a file started on him. 1940. That's what I said. We do not understand the system of racism, white supremacy, the resources, the time and energy, the coordination to studying and surveilling Negroes. This is 1940s Paul Robeson. Imagine what that would look like today. Anything else? Make sure I get in. Eagerly capturing the words. I'll stop there. I guess if I would add one more thing, this book was published in 2016. I'm not sure how many people reading this book have knowledge of J. Edgar Hoover and the COINTELPRO campaign. I guess if there's one thing I would add, it would be this is not random. It would be including that by this point, the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, they already had practice at destroying black people, black organizations. They had already done this to Marcus Garvey some 2 decades earlier. So, and that's why I said Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, Racial Matters, continuing. They didn't just destroy Marcus Garvey and his organization. It continued. Negroes are suspicious. Exactly what you see here with Robeson. Negroes are suspicious. We know they're not. We know anybody could come to them and say, hey, you're not treated well in the U.S. because we stomp on niggas. He said we treat them like garbage. That's exactly what Dr. O'Reilly said. We treat the Negroes like garbage here, so we know their loyalties are suspect, so we got to keep eyes on Negroes like the Robesons because we know we're going to treat them bad and continue to do so. That should have been enhanced. There should have been greater detail. That could have been Really, that could have been a whole paragraph with the extensiveness of this campaign. That could have been, excuse me, not a whole paragraph. That could have been a whole chapter, at a minimum, a few pages, just to say, hey, what they were doing to Mr. Robeson and him kind of not realizing the scale of this, they had been doing for a long time, and this was a precursor of what was to intensify during the so-called civil rights movement. Maybe he does do some of that. You can keep that in mind, but I suspect you probably, particularly black people, probably have a substantial number of black people who do not have that information. And so going in and reading about what was happening to Mr. Robeson, it would have been great to give them that additional context. And I can stop there. Folks have any other comments, questions, suggestions that they want to make sure they get in before we get to the second audio segment? *61, if so.
Can I be heard?
Retired firefighter, yes, sir.
Yes. First of all, did you get my contacts about the recordings? Were you able to get them?
I'll go back and double check now. Let's see. If you want to proceed, I'll let you know once my email loads here.
Yeah, just for future, that I would know that you were getting them. Okay. I was aware of COINTEMPORAL and the shenanigans of suspected racist J. Edgar Hoover, who was also identified by the Black Panther Party and some others as gay Edgar Hoover. And he's had plenty of practice, meaning as early as the I would say something like the 1920s, 30s. He was involved with others with the idea of destroying any effort that would challenge and or be against the system of racist white supremacy. He was involved with others into dismantling individual as well as collective efforts with the Black Panther Party. They were utilizing some of the techniques and strategies that they actually do today with entire quote-unquote countries. They were utilizing that on a bunch of non-white black teenagers and early 20s non-white black people. Members such as Eldridge Cleaver was called old, and he was about 34 years old at the time. But they were utilizing techniques and strategies, anything from murder to using the technology of the day in order to confuse and or pit groups together that would eventually harm and fight against one another. Yes, I think I heard you say about the documentary at the beginning of the program, which I didn't hear, but I have seen that documentary. What was the name of it again? I forgot what it was.
Scandalize My Name.
Scandalize My Name. Yeah, excellent documentary. Excellent documentary. It doesn't just talk about Mr. Robeson. It gives a good picture as far as documentaries are concerned about all of the non-white people who in this part of the world who were attempting to fight against the system of racist white supremacy in that particular vein. It also mentions Hazel Scott, who I always thought was interesting, that I didn't know prior to of who she was. And it goes from an example that you were talking about where white people can just erase a black person out of history. And she was a very significant person, very talented person also, former wife of Congressman Adam Clayton Powell, where she was a great pianist and singer, but at the same time, using her talents and very determined. The whole thing about, like you were saying about how the race would practice racism at their concerts, and they would the people that they're doing business with cease and desist in practicing racism, white supremacy at their concerts, despite them getting paid or not. That wasn't suffice enough for them. They wanted people to not be mistreated. But they mentioned about her also in that documentary. It's with a whole lot of non-white black people who were quote unquote entertainers / actresses that their careers were destroyed by these white people who utilized this weapon in order to get those things done. But yeah, that's basically what my second report is. Thank you.
Much obliged, retired firefighter. Scandalize My Name, that documentary title again. Any other folks, comments they want to make sure they get in before we get to the second audio segment?
Yeah, I wanted to comment in regards to Robeson's fight against fascism, or as Dr. Welsing calls fascism, in-stage white supremacy. How ironic it is where the white U.S. government would allow Robeson to speak against fascism or in-stage white supremacy abroad in other countries, in particular Nazi Germany, but not allowed to talk about the lynchings, as he had mentioned, or the burnings of people in Florida, or non-white black people in Florida at the time. So, and you mentioned it about how the FBI found out that Robeson found out about some army officials collaborating with, pro-Nazi people in Czechoslovakia. And I'm sitting here like, okay, the investigation on Robeson just like ratcheted up. Why is nobody investigating these officers, or who are these officers who are collaborating with these pro-Nazi people? And last week, I wasn't able to join live last week, but I was listening to Dr. Horne touched on the Japanese and black non-white black people alliance during World War II, and Dr. Horne. It's interesting because Dr. Horne actually wrote a book last year about that called "Facing the Rising Sun." African American Japan and the Rise of Afro-Asian Solidarity. I haven't read that book, but I remember when that book came out, I wanted to get it. But yeah, he has a whole book on that, in particular about how many black people in the 40s had supported Japan during World War II. So probably something to think of, consider probably in the future book club. So, but that's all I have right now.
Much obliged, Henry in Chicago. Let's see, person that dialed in, I think you're on a Skype line. If you had questions, comments to share, you should be with us. Caller on a Skype line, did you have commentary to share? Or if you're just listening, that's fine too.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. If you could speak up or get a little bit closer to your microphone.
Okay, is this better?
Yes, ma'am.
So, two of the points that stood out, I would like to confess I don't have the book. I'm listening to the recordings and trying to pick up what I hope is the proper context. So some points may be salient as others, but if anyone would like to clarify along the way, I'm open to that. I heard the name Walter White. I'm not sure what the context was, but over time, I continue to hear what I believe I'm hearing about this person is that there were some incidents, some activities which I continue to hear him associated in, that there was not as well support of Black people. And I think he was the NAACP chairman, or I don't really recall, but over time I just continue to hear that there may have been some problems with his leadership as it pertains to Black people. FBI, Cohen, Pro, that's the context of how in the system of racism, white supremacy, we continue to learn that we're being closely monitored. And so the point about who can go where and can do what while they're there, if they're ever really allowed to go. Another person's name that came to mind was Minister Louis Farrakhan. I think he is restrained from traveling, I think it's Europe. I don't think he's allowed to go there. So to go along with some of the other names, such as Minister Malcolm, Marcus Garvey, others that were named, I would like to also make mention that if that's my correct understanding, he also is not allowed to travel outside or inside of some territories. The term Sri Lanka, I'm not sure if I heard the context properly, but who changed the name to Sri Lanka? I'm thinking whoever changed the name to Sri Lanka in the power of the global system of racism, white supremacy. That's the point. And also, when we were hearing that Paul Robeson had gained weight and was becoming unhealthy and had developing unhealthy habits, his friends who had not observed him over time, when they did see him, noted that he had picked up weight. And I'm not sure whether these were his white friends or others, but they referred to him as he looked like an ox, which is an animal characterization of a Black male. And finally, the 7 books a week was quite impressive. And to quote the grandcestor, reading is more important than watching TV. So Paul Robeson was a precocious reader, apparently. And those are my comments at this time. Thank you.
Much obliged for the commentary. Always appreciate a reference to Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's encouragement that we do a lot more reading. Absolutely. I'll give a thought on Walter White in 1 second. With the NAACP, Walter White. Draftomania, did you have commentary? You should be with us as well. Are you just listening, or did you have a commentary?
Oh, hi, Gus. I did have, I wanted to ask about that documentary, but you did say it again. What was the name of that documentary again?
Scandalize My Name.
Okay. Awesome. And I wanted to know, you got my Sergeant Dorsey.
One more time, please.
I sent you an email about Sergeant Dorsey.
It is really difficult to hear you. If you could speak up and or get
her on the show.
Can you say the name again?
Oh, hold on. I said I sent you Sergeant Dorsey. Last name is Dorsey. I sent you an email.
No, she has not been a guest on the program, but we will check that out and see if she'd be someone worthy of chatting it up with.
Yeah, I sent you an email, so check your email to see if you received the email.
Yes, ma'am. Much obliged, Draftomania. I will get caught up on my emails.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I missed out on the show. I listened late. I forgot that you was going to start earlier, but I'm glad I'm able to catch on to what I'm able to catch. Thank you for taking my call.
Yes, ma'am. It will be in the archives. I assume we probably would mess up a few people throwing them off with our little earlier start, but hopefully it'll be worth it. I'll be able to record the book signing, so it'll be like twofer. We'll be able to get audio from the book signing as well, which is supposed to be directly about white supremacy in the school system. Reading, more important than watching television. Any other comments? Folks need questions, comments? Folks need to get in. Take one more before we get to the next audio segment. Assume folks are satisfied, at least for the time being. Walter White, not to be confused with Breaking Bad's race soldier Walter White, but NAACP former president Walter White. He was mentioned before. Actually, he's been mentioned a bunch of times on the Cows, in the book club, other guests who've been on the program. Walter White was a very pale, non-white person. I believe he had a white parent. He was able to pass for white. He was able to do a lot of investigating of lynchings because a lot of times he could fool folks. They assumed that he was white, so they would talk to him. I think they mentioned in the text that one time he was given a badge and a gun. They just assumed he was here to help them control and keep order with their niggers. And then another time, he was on a train. I think this was in the Want of Other Sons, and a white man started talking, a racist started talking to him and said, "Oh yeah, we're looking for this light-skinned Negro coming down here stirring up trouble, named Walter White." And Walter has talked to him like, "Oh my Lord, I need to get out of this town immediately." So, victim of racism. I think regardless, there have always been questions about NAACP leadership. I would be stunned. Roy Wilkins, anybody who's been in charge, Kwame Nkrumah, anybody that's been jealous. There have always been questions about NAACP leadership and what they're doing and how they are responding to white supremacy racism. And I think in this section they mentioned that Mr. Robeson, as he became more so-called radical militant, that some of his white friends and even non-white friends began to distance themselves and, I don't know about this Robeson fellow, not too pleased about some of what he's doing. So I think the NAACP was very much influenced by race soldiers, whites, so I'm sure that had some impact on how they felt about Mr. Robeson. We will pause here. If you have additional questions, comments, things you would like to share, or things don't make sense that have been shared, make a note. You should have time to share once the second audio segment concludes. We are picking up at the very beginning of Chapter 6, Black Stalin, with a question mark. So this is Dr. Gerald Horne, his biography on Paul Robeson, the artist as revolutionary, context of white supremacy. This is audio segment number 2, narrated by Henry in Chicago.
Chapter 6, Black Stalin. Though there were indications that the U.S. would turn sharply to the right after the war concluded, thereby jeopardizing his livelihood, if not his life, Paul Robeson initially proceeded without evident signs that he sensed the wide and tumultuous dimensions of what was brewing. In December 1945, as Londa Robeson, still acting in a managerial capacity, was continuing to regard her chief client as one of the greatest concert attractions in the Western world, which was hardly inaccurate. She was negotiating with Sergei Einstein about producing a film about Felix Eboué, a hero of the Francophone world due to his stern anti-fascism. When Charles de Gaulle was here in early autumn, she said, I talked with him about the idea and he was enthusiastic. The couple spent a day with Madame Eboué in New York when she passed through on her way to Paris, and the great man's widow was thrilled over the whole idea, feeling that Paul would make a magnificent Eboué. Overly optimistic, she adjudged that if the film is done correctly, this may be a fine chance for the Soviet film industry to enter the world film market. But even then, it would have not been premature to assert that the U.S. was not only keen in preserving its dominance of the global film market, but that it also determined to ensure that a man, Robeson, who could be a wedge in eroding this hegemony, would not be allowed to flourish. As matters evolved, Hollywood became a major battlefield, which increased the pressure on Robeson. He was to salute the communist screenwriter John Howard Lawson for his bravura upbraiding of inquiring congressmen. It gave him a thrill of pride, said Robeson, hailing the writer's vehemence and eloquence. He denounced the low content and superficiality and conscious aversion to truth of Hollywood, something he knew well, though it did little to enhance his popularity among moguls generally. Of course, Miss Robeson's outreach to Moscow on her spouse's behalf should not be taken to mean their marriage had returned to the bliss of the early 1920s. In May 1964, she told the press that her husband had 10 days at home in the last year. While performing Othello, Robeson leased an apartment in the fashionable section of Manhattan, 38th Street and Park Avenue, extenuating and facilitating his many absences from home. Still, this scenario does not account for Robeson's own ability, or inability, to sense that the warm relationship between Washington and Moscow was simply a function of the war, and did not signal an ongoing entente. For Robeson was thrown off balance by another contemporaneous development, the ruckus that enveloped the U.S. Communist Party. Robeson disclaimed membership, but was certainly quite close to its leaders, particularly William Patterson and Ben Davis, and it was in 1945 that this group underwent a wrenching and painful split as their leader, Earl Browder, was ousted, along with the political approach he symbolized. Seeing the friendly U.S.-USSR summit in Tehran in 1943 was emblematic of a long-term trend. The unrest generated by this instability disoriented Robeson's comrades, on whom he relied for counsel at a time when clear and unsullied analysis was needed more than ever. Davis's summary of his conversation with Robeson about this controversy was captured by the FBI. I saw Paul and had a conversation with him last night, and then I had a more extended talk with him today. He found that Robeson didn't think much about our past policies, and figured that at some time later it will be necessary for us to regard ourselves in the old party way, meaning a return to the idea of confrontation, not conciliation, with the U.S. ruling class. A French communist, Jacques Duclos, had denounced the recently installed policy of conciliation leading to the ousting of Browder after he spearheaded this now rejected policy, and Robeson didn't think much more about the matter until he read Duclos' article that Perusal made it obvious that we went too far. Such a view expressing skepticism about the wisdom of the socialist lamb reclining comfortably with the capitalist lion was to brand Robeson as a hardliner, making him even more of a target for U.S. intelligence agencies. And this meant more probing questions from government interrogators determined to ascertain if he were a member of the U.S. Communist Party. This persistent query was posed in October 1946 by California State Senator Jack Tenney, and as ever, Robeson was just as dogged in rejecting the question and the questionnaire, telling the legislator that his committee was evidence that fascism lived. Robeson, as was his habit, characterized himself as a militant anti-fascist, but made it clear that he preferred the CP over the Republicans. Since he traveled globally, he found the former were the first people to die, the first to sacrifice, and the first to understand fascism. The FBI continued to insist that Robeson was in fact a card-carrying member of the U.S. Party, registering under the pseudonym John Thomas. If a date can be ascertained for the formal launching of the Cold War and its handmaiden, the Red Scare, it will be 5 March 1946, when Winston Churchill journeyed to Missouri with President Harry S. Truman, who had replaced Roosevelt after his untimely death. There, the pudgy, cigar-chomping, alcohol-guzzling British Tory announced that an Iron Curtain had descended across Europe, a reference to a divided Europe, and ultimately a divided world, with communists surging in power in the East in the aftermath of Berlin's defeat. These radicals, he argued, intended a dire fate for those in their jurisdiction and those who struggled against them, who were presently beyond their purview. This was to lead to bloody wars in Korea and Vietnam, while continuing attempts to overthrow colonialism were combated by the Washington-London axis in the name of fighting communism. At a certain point, U.S. leaders began to question the sagacity of shedding blood and treasure to combat communists abroad, while allowing these self-proclaimed revolutionaries to exist at home, particularly those like Robeson, who had demonstrated a proven ability to attract millions. Still, moving the U.S. and the North Atlantic community generally from the entente of the war to the confrontation of the Cold War was not a speedy process, taking a while for the new approach to trickle down to the front lines. Surely, before Churchill's portentous words, the post-war glow seemed to be intact. Robeson was honored with the highest award of the NAACP at the star-studded reception at the Biltmore Hotel in Manhattan in October 1945. Unsurprisingly, Robeson praised socialism, which at that point was not considered beyond the pale. The pro-socialist Robeson was asked by the publication of the rising Negro millionaire, John H. Johnson, to pose for their glossy pages. They wanted a nice layout to be titled, perhaps, All-American Family, presenting the Robesons in their home, which started me wondering, said the editor, why someone does not do a book on the Robesons family, the title All-American Family. Such was not to be, and, if anything, soon the Robeson family was to be scorned, if anything, as in all-Soviet family. Yet, during that different era, Johnson himself asked Miss Robeson to become a contributing editor of his infant periodical. In early 1946, Robeson's income was yet to come under assault, so his plush estate remained his hideaway on the few occasions he abandoned his demanding routine of concerts and political rallies. He had promised Ben Davis that he would come up with me to Enfield so that we could talk over many things, not to mention a few games of uninterrupted and concentrated chess, and perhaps some tennis too. Davis, a frequent guest, had grown accustomed to the comfortably informal residence, which resembled the workshop of an absentee-mind professor, appropriate for a man whose secret ambition was to be a professor of languages. As in London, bookcases were packed tight, lining many rooms, groaning from the weight of studied volumes. Even the top of the grand piano was used to hold tomes. Volumes of Proust and Chekhov abound, and various books in diverse languages, though Robeson conceded that, for many of these tongues, he read them better than he spoke them. He hoped someday, it was said then, to read Confucius in the original. Davis, along with Patterson, his closest friend and comrade, knew better than most that had left to his own devices. Robeson, as he declared, had only one ambition: to be a great scholar and teacher. For someday, he mused, I'll give up the theater and join the faculty of a college, perhaps pursuing his true love, philology and linguistics. But that was not to be. Even then, during the height of his popularity in the U.S., before he became a recluse late in life, Robeson acknowledged, I always wanted the curtains closed and lights turned on in any room. I don't like to look out at the world. Robeson continued to build the Council on African Affairs, the vanguard organization in the U.S. campaigning against colonialism. In the early 1946, Harlem witnessed what was described as one of the greatest meetings ever held. There, when thousands gathered at a famine relief rally focused on suffering in Africa that received expressions of support from the contralto Marian Anderson, Eleanor Roosevelt, Mary McLeod Bethune, and the Jamaican-born communist Ferdinand Smith, then the highest-ranking Negro in the trade union movement in his capacity as leader of the National Maritime Union. Even after the Iron Curtain speech, it seemed to be business as usual when boxer Joe Louis joined with Robeson in hailing a huge rally in Manhattan targeting South Africa and the colonized continent generally. Days later, there was Robeson linking a speedy end to both lynching and colonialism at a staggeringly large rally of 15,000 at Madison Square Garden in Manhattan. Joining him was the dancer Catherine Dunham, and messages of support were received from Nehru in India, A.B. Exuma of the African National Congress of South Africa, and Ken Hill, a leader of the Union movement in Jamaica. The U.S. authority had quite a chore in seeking to disrupt Robeson's anti-colonial ties. Just before independence, Nehru confided to my dear Essie that I often think of you and Paul. Robeson was friendly with Norman Manley, the anti-colonial leader of the island of Jamaica. As he informed Robeson then, we here follow your work with great interest. Robeson made it clear that when he spoke of the Negro, he meant American Negroes as well as West Indians and Africans. This also meant in that very process of helping others, speaking of African Americans, we add to our own strength and bring nearer full freedom of ourselves. This also meant special attention to uranium from the Belgian Congo for atomic bombs and rubber for Firestone, the U.S. giant corporation taken from Liberia. Disrupting this expansive view of the Negro became a priority for Washington, whose strategy was to offer civil rights concessions to U.S. Negroes at home while bolstering colonialism and neocolonialism abroad. Robeson's critique of U.S. policy towards Pretoria had become so strident that a future Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, felt compelled to reply to him at the United Nations, excoriating the artist's alleged misapprehensions. Ironically and damningly, Dulles conceded in a way that undermined his own nation. I did not feel that the United States, in view of its own record, was justified in adopting a holier-than-thou attitude toward the Union of South Africa, which was precisely the point, and which was to doom ultimately both apartheid and Jim Crow to the dung heap of history. Robeson was then mulling a proposal to return to the silver screen, this time playing the lead role in a cinematic version of an acclaimed novel by his friend Howard Fast. Freedom Road was later to be made as a movie starring the boxer Muhammad Ali in the role of a slave who rises after the U.S. Civil War to high political office. One periodical allowed Robeson to assert strikingly and truthfully that if he went to Hong Kong tomorrow, the people there would know me because of the Chinese records I had made. Even in 1947, the counsel for the regime in Port-au-Prince told Robeson that President Dumarçais Esti and his cabinet would be delighted to be honored by having you visit them and spending a few days as the guests of the Republic of Haiti. Yet, this buoyant global popularity was to be punctured and deflated, and this process began in his homeland and, intriguingly, may have begun in the White House itself. It was there in September 1946 that Robeson vehemently charged that it was hypocritical for the U.S. to take the lead in Nuremberg in indicating purveyors of race hatred while lethargically engaging the same at home. What is happening in Nuremberg is a travesty on democracy, said Robeson, when the people of America are murdered by the same kind of men that are on trial, drawing a connection between the parlous domestic plight of Negroes and global trends had touched the sensitive Achilles heel of the Republic for decades, and this was bound to bring a forceful counter-reaction. The clear implication of Robeson's denunciation was that U.S. officials, President Truman included, were surely worthy of being dragged into the dock, an event that Robeson sought to ensure when a few years later he and Patterson filed a petition with the United Nations charging their nation with genocide against African Americans. Soon, Robeson made clear that I heartily endorse the proposal of the Soviet Union to make race discrimination and hatred a crime. At once, this linked tightly the most pressing global and domestic concerns, which simultaneously placed Truman himself in legal jeopardy. The president may have heard that Robeson was becoming the most unrelenting critic of what was called the Truman Doctrine, the assumed right of the U.S. to intervene globally to combat socialism. Yet, how could the U.S. move on this treacherous course when African Americans were being told by the most popular amongst them that this was decidedly inimical to their interests? The response was to erode Jim Crow, then toss Robeson and his comrades overboard. Robeson's attorney, Leonard Bowden, felt that his client's real Waterloo was encountered when he led an angry delegation to Washington to confront President Truman about a spate of lynching, including the maiming of Negroes in military uniforms. There, Robeson had an inflamed face-to-face confrontation with the Missourian, which led to the president banging the table, as if these blows were intended for the man across from him. With blood apparently rushing to his temple because of the anxiety induced, the purpling Truman was vociferous in his reprimand of Robeson, though not as pointed in his condemnation of lynching. It was just after that meeting that Truman moved to circumscribe Robeson's globetrotting, which was akin to cutting off his oxygen supply. It was during Truman's reign that Robeson's passport was snatched, which, according to his attorney, destroyed 10 or 11 or 12 creative years, the most important years in his life. Robeson, he argued, because he was a black leader, created more anger and even fear, but certainly anger in the white community, combined with the allegation that Robeson secretly wished to become the nation's Black Stalin. The pressure on him to recant his revolutionary views became very palpable. But even before Robeson's fiery encounter with Truman, there were symptoms of the artist's deteriorating relationship to the state. Days after Churchill's pronouncement in Missouri, Robeson was to be found in Detroit, a bastion of labor and Negro militancy, whose future mayor, Coleman Young, was as close to Communist Party, if not closer, than Robeson himself. Robeson was there at the founding of an organization, the Civil Rights Congress, with which he collaborated with the same level of intensity and commitment that he devoted to the Council of African Affairs. There, Robeson was described as rough, tough, and angry in his embattled remarks and received a standing ovation in return. His broadcast speech read like an angry poem, said a reporter on the scene, and he read it like a call to battle. These pressures came to a head in Jefferson City, in the home state of the president, where Robeson had brought his anti-lynching crusade. There, he was involved in a perilous automobile accident, but investigation revealed that 4 bolts had been removed from the lugs of a tire and a 5th mishandled intentionally, preordaining that Robeson's car would be diverted dangerously from its intended course. That is, only 1 bolt was found on the hubcap, meaning that the others had been removed and the cap then placed in such a way as to conceal this defect. Without a doubt, this was done while the car was parked, as the car had been driven only recently from St. Louis, scores of kilometers away, without incident. Yet Robeson was increasingly vilified at this point. Soon he was to be labeled Black Stalin. Thus, it was mostly the Negro press that sounded the alarm about this attempted assassination. Robeson cheats death, said the Pittsburgh Courier, as prejudice prompted an attempt on his life. Yes, it was concluded the tire on his vehicle was tampered with. Months later, Robeson was to tell the U.S. Congress bluntly, "I have been threatened with death 2 or 3 times." And this incident may have been foremost in his mind. Miss Robeson was said to fear killers, adding, "Each night before I go to bed, I put a broad-bladed hunting knife under my pillow, along with a portable burglar alarm. The police have turned down my request for a gun permit, but I'm terrified," she tremulously, "that somebody might try to avenge themselves on me." This murderous attempt was the response to Robeson's cry at a picket line in St. Louis organized by Patterson's Civil Rights Congress, where the artist announced that he was retiring from the concert stage and had chosen to enter the day-to-day struggle of the people from whom I sprang. Thus, he said his intention was to talk up and down the nation against race hatred and prejudice. On the one hand, since his concerts were beginning to be boycotted by impresarios and booking agents in any case, this cry was simply making the best of a bad situation. Yet, later Robeson was to rue this decision, feeling that it removed him from the wellspring of what had been phenomenal support. "I'm devoting time mainly to assisting progressive causes and lending whatever aid I can to fight," was his conclusion then. Thus, in October 1947, he was singing before 7,000 in Norfolk, Virginia, more than half of whom were white, as was to be the trend. The audience was also slated to hear a political message from him, except just before the program was to begin, the chief of police appeared and announced, "You got to have these people separated." In other words, segregated. The organizer replied, "White people can get their money back if they don't want to sit with Negroes," but was told, "What kind of white people are these?" For, unusually, not a single one asked for a refund. Days later, Robeson was in the capital of the Confederacy, Richmond, at a program sponsored by his college fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha. Again, the assembled were interrupted rudely by the authorities as the police entered the hall and sought aggressively to enforce the state's segregation law by demanding that those defined as white not sit next to those not so defined. But not a single white person moved, though one Negro was arrested for failing to follow police orders to change his seat. Earlier, Robeson had not been allowed to rent a hall in Albany, New York, though a Nazi supporter had not been so mistreated. The worst was to come. Little concern was raised in the mainstream when it was reported that during a Robeson visit to Peoria, Illinois, the ultra-right threatened to get him, in other words, inflict mayhem upon him. Forebodingly, this anti-Robeson alliance included executives of the region's major employer, Caterpillar, which specialized in earth-moving machinery, then being contested by a left-led union. Yet, these executives had recruited to their side the American Legion war veterans, who included a godly number of Euro-American workers who were ultra-conservative influence was bound to move unions rightward. Robeson was appalled. The whole city was subjected to terroristic control, he said. His unionized supporters were immobilized, while the Negro community was intimidated. The struggle against fascism was the nub, he cried. But with his 2 bulwarks of support battered, Robeson was increasingly appearing to be a sacrificial lamb. "No," said an anti-communist journalist writing for the liberal magazine The Nation, in what was becoming a popular mantra, Robeson was stalked and rebuffed. It was said not because of racism, but because of communism. Vainly, Robeson sought to uphold the now tattered banner of working class internationalism. I have seen hunger at close quarters, here, at home, and abroad, he reminded. I have seen Sudanese workers in Egypt labored in the cotton fields from dawn to sundown on a meager diet. I have lived with Welsh miners, Glasgow dock workers, French metal workers, and Italian farm laborers. But his dream, embodied in his determined study of languages, that the oppressed globally shared universal concerns, was being overwritten by a contrasting tidal wave that uplifted American exceptionalism and the companion notion that the U.S. stood hubristically apart from this global movement. By 1947, Robeson realized intently that a new stage in domestic and global politics had arrived, which called for a renewed stance on his part. He was never much of a writer. Once, the lyricist Earl Robinson complained that over a long period of experience with Paul, and some of it quite close, I have never been able to get a written or even a wired reply from him. When I was with him in person, in contrast, of course, the situation is entirely different. A communist journalist who interviewed him more than once echoed this consensus about Robeson, as he did the imprisoned Ben Davis, hungering vainly to hear from his comrade. Surely, this reluctance of Robeson to write was not a useful political trait, but now sensing the emergency at play, Robeson started penning weekly columns and eventually was to launch his own newspaper to highlight his and like-minded opinions. Robeson was struck by the remarkable parallel between the valiant fight of the freed slaves during Reconstruction and the struggle which confront all darker peoples today. Similarly, the concentration of power and wealth and white supremacy rule in South Africa represent a threat not only to the whole of Africa, but to India, Asia, and the entire non-white world, including, and he added pointedly, Negro America. Thus, Robeson heightened his solidarity with the union that represented the kind of working class internationalism he supported, the National Maritime Union, whose seafarers sailed into ports globally, which was headed by a Jamaican, Ferdinand Smith, a man who the artist had the highest respect for and whose union he too held in special esteem. With Smith's aid, he also began to highlight the value of Jamaican independence, instructing readers that the existence of a Negro-governed country was so close to our shores is bound to have an important moral and political influence on the freedom struggle of 13 million Negroes on the mainland. I have discussed West Indian problems with Arthur Creech Jones, the president of the present British colonial secretary, British Foreign Minister Ernest Bevin, Aneurin Bavin, the Minister of Fuel, and Sir Stafford Cripps. Indicative of what Robeson acknowledged, I am no stranger to West Indian problems, a major asset in New York City, which contained a large immigrant population from this region.
Context of White Supremacy, that will do it for this here session. Thank you again to everyone for being patient with the switch up for this week. We'll be back at normal time next week, and hopefully we will have an extra audio segment from the book reading in about 30 minutes or so. Anyway, we are in the middle point of Chapter 6. We'll pick up there next Thursday. If you have comments, questions to share, the number is 605-313-5163. 564. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. If you did not get to share it all, and you have an observation or question that you want to make sure you share, don't wait till the last minute. Go ahead and press star 61, and we'll make sure you are one of the first folks that we get on the line. If you are with us and you have a hand up, line should be open. Retired firefighter, Drapetomania, Henry in Chicago, our other female caller. All of you should be with us, and then, as I said, I will be alert for other hands. If you all have thoughts, commentary, proceed.
Can I be heard?
Henry in Chicago, yes, sir.
This reading touching upon Robeson's confrontation or view of straight white terrorism. We see that his car was rigged for him to have an accident, and hopefully for white people that accident would have been fatal. He also traveled to Peoria, where he explicitly talked about how the people there were terrorized and the Negroes were intimidated. So Robeson is finally seeing outright terrorism on a personal level, and when he goes to places where these white supremacists is not so welcoming to union workers. I'm assuming that some of these union workers might have non-white people in it. Probably that's why they were against unions. But yeah, that's something that Robeson was fighting against. And also, too, references to Ferdinand Smith. Just like in the last session, Dr. Horne has also written a book on Ferdinand Smith, Red Seas, Ferdinand Smith, and black radical black sailors in the United States and Jamaica. I think he wrote this book in 2005. So just another suggestion of Horne's work. So and that's all I have right now.
Much obliged, Henry in Chicago. Dr. Horne has an extensive library, most of it dealing directly, indirectly, with white supremacy racism as a global system. Other folks who dialed in, if you have comments, questions you want to share, line should be open. Proceed.
Can I be heard?
Greetings, Drapetomania.
Greetings. I just wanted to share when he talked about the incident with his car. It took me. I was able to identify it, but it took me back to the incident that happened to me back in, I'm not sure what year. I would say like the early 2000s. I had a car that I had to leave with the used cars that I was trying to get service. Took it over to Sears to get, because I kept having issues with my brakes and my calipers and those rotors. So they were supposedly fix the car, but it might sound strange, but I kept on having this dream. Like I was hearing the squeaking and stuff in the car. So I kept having this recurring nightmare where I would get into an accident, and I was and one of the nightmares that I had, it was some cars coming, like I think a truck or something like that, oncoming. And I used to have to work. I worked like maybe 45 minutes to an hour away from where I lived at. So I would have to drive that far just to get to work. But I kept having this dream, and I told I was then married. Told my ex-husband that I think you need to go get these brakes checked out again because I'm hearing a sound and I keep having this dream that I'm going to get into an accident. So took the car back to Sears, got it checked, and lo and behold, the exact thing that Mr. Robeson explained what happened to his car. The people that fixed the car, they did not put the bolts back into the rotors and the tires. There was no bolts or anything holding the car together. They said they left the screws and stuff out of the car. I don't know how they ended up doing that. It was, all I can say is it was just a miracle that I ended up not dying and ended up being safe. I don't know what happened, if it was divine intervention or what it was, but I am a miracle for even being here today based on them not putting my car together. And it just kind of triggered, it triggered all of that just by reading, you reading that part of that book. And also I wanted to discuss, like, when you said something about how the COINTELPRO, how they were targeting Tupac Shakur as a baby because of his parents' affiliation. It took me back to I think when I was reading Blood Brothers, but then I ended up, like, whenever you have like a reader or somebody, that we're doing a book, I usually do research on the reader and, I look into their YouTube and things like that. So I think it was in the Taj book or something where they were saying that they were monitoring Muhammad Ali also. Remember, they were saying that they were monitoring Muhammad Ali when he was a teenager, because when he joined the Nation of Islam, they started investigating him as a teenager. And then we can even go to Maria. They started investigating him as a teenager. And the point about White, this gentleman named White, I forget his first name. They also stated that when I did my research, it was saying that he also infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan. He had an opportunity to, if I'm not mistaken, infiltrate the Ku Klux Klan and investigate the Ku Klux Klan because he was so light. And that's basically all I had to share. And thanks for allowing me to share.
Much obliged, Draptomania. Other folks, if you have commentary, line should be open. Again, don't wait till the last minute if you have something to share.
Can I be heard?
Retired firefighter.
Ironically, I have a additional almost lost my life story similar to Paul Robeson. On the way to work, this was somewhere around the mid to late 1980s, driving a 1971 Corvette. All of a sudden, I heard a rumbling on my right rear side, and the same sound that makes as your tire has been punctured and is going flat. Blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden, I felt the lower right side of the vehicle coming down, and I saw moving ahead of me my right rear tire, passing me at about 50 miles an hour. I think I was going maybe 60, but the tire, I was going maybe 40, but the tire passed me at about 50, 60 miles an hour. And I can hear the right rear scraping the ground for about maybe 20 yards, something like that. Got out the car. I actually got to work by a fellow quote-unquote firefighter, white male racist suspect, and the same situation took place as far as the lugs were either missing or was not properly placed back on the vehicle. I was becoming less confused and being active. I'm not necessarily saying that has something directly to do with my my vehicle lugs or anything, but I don't know. But anyway, Minister Malcolm X once said that of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. He may have gotten that phrase also from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. But nevertheless, during this particular time in the book, there was a lot of history going on at the time. We're talking about in the Western, quote unquote, Europe, the non-white black people who were fleeing from their homeland, going to the place where the origins of the people who were mistreating them, England, they were organizing in the eastern part of Europe. There was a lot of things going on. I think also they mentioned somewhere during the second reading that there were some U.S. officials that was involved into having the Nazis, even after the unconditional surrender of Germany, still working and gaining advantage in their workmanship and whatnot, that sort of thing. At that time, famous General, I think George Patton was involved with that also at the time before he was killed in Europe. He was involved with organizing that. As far as he was, kind of like friendly with the Nazis. Had them to doing a lot of the work in Germany at the time. Also, we're talking about the urge, the effort they use the word decolonization. I think it's an accurate term put to that, but I'll use that for right now. That was the origins of it was starting to happen during that time. Korea, China, Vietnam, during that time it was going on, and they had adapted some of the political science of that came out of the Soviet Union, but at the same time, as China, as it was known in China, they basically didn't go by it word for word. They adapted their own means of that particular type of science to be able to fight against the system of racist white supremacy at the time. And Mr. Robeson was right involved with, if not a lot of it, most of it at the time. He was such a global figure, even from such, much more primitive times as far as technology is concerned. He was involved with it. And I can see where there were efforts on this global system of racist white supremacy's behalf to neutralize him. As normally what they would do, the first thing they would try to do with that type of person is not to kill them outright, but to kind of like have them to make some sort of mistake, to whereas they can neutralize them by in much more refined means by scandalizing their names, which goes back to that documentary. If that doesn't work, basically what they would do is similar to what they eventually did with him, as well as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, they would just outright either kill them or just cause some kind of permanent damage to them. And so this is getting almost right in the height of that particular type of confrontation that he's getting involved in. And that's what I have to say for this second reading. Thank you.
Much obliged, retired firefighter. If other folks, if you think you have a question or comment, go ahead and get a hand up. I'll try to go through some of my comments before I get ready to dash across the street for the book event at Elliott Bay here in Seattle. So they wrote, Eslanda Robeson. She said that Paul had 10 days at home in the last year. This is in May of 1946. The system is not designed to support healthy relationships between non-white people, not marriages, not anything. On the same page, it talked about, again, the FBI capturing information about a conversation that Mr. Robeson had about racism, white supremacy, global politics of some way, shape, form. Just to continue to emphasize, I mean, hey, it's not like they had Alexa at this, period in time, I don't think. And all of the high-tech gadgetry to just record here and record there, and we got the cloud, upload that. And I mean, it's a little bit primitive in terms of some of that technology at this point in time, and they're still nabbing conversations here, there. Oh, he was talking here. Oh, we got some more uppityness here. I mean, keep that in mind for 21st century. It says Robeson was branded as a hardliner, whatever that means, making him even more of a target. I don't even know what that means. A hardliner? Watch all of that when they throw these terms out, referring to non-white people, especially people classified as black. They said bloody wars in Korea and Vietnam, while continuing attempts to overthrow colonialism, were combated by the Washington-London-led Axis in the name of fighting communism. In my view, racist white supremacists do a lot of practicing white supremacy that gets called other names, and practicing white supremacy or doing things to enforce white supremacy where they cause disruptions on non-white continents or places where a lot of non-white people reside. That's happened a few times just in the text. With World War II, you had a lot of conflicts happening on the continent where different groups, so-called nations of white, saying, well, this chunk of the continent, these are our niggers here, so we'll use them to fight. We'll do some of the fighting here. Then you see the same thing with Vietnam and Korea, where white people can find another way of fighting each other or squabbling about how they're going to run the global plantation. Let's see, next. I thought it was important, the Johnson Publishing Company and him having this relationship, wanting to present them as the all-American family, and even asking Mrs. Robeson if she wanted to work on staff. And then now the bankruptcy issues that are happening currently. Let's see. Let's see. I thought it was really important. They said another point that made Robeson an increasing target of COINTELPRO type mistreatment was a global understanding of how black people were being mistreated, where he said the Negro, in quotes, he meant American Negroes as well as West Indians and Africans. This also meant that in that very process of helping others, speaking of African Americans, we add to our own strength and bring nearer full freedom for ourselves. And he went on to talk about black people being mistreated in the Congo. Liberia, again, played that clip where he talked about Firestone. Any analysis of white supremacy racism that begins, in my view, it's accurate. White people are doing the same thing worldwide. This is not just about what's happening in Birmingham or Ferguson or whatever specific event might be taking place right now. This is a global enterprise of domination and terrorism. When you start getting that sort of analysis, oh man, too accurate. Can't have that. Got to have them confused. Can't have them with that level of accuracy in talking about the problem. Let's see. And again, just showing the level of mistreatment, abuse, surveillance Mr. Robeson and Mrs. Robeson had to be attracting. If you've gotten to the point where the Secretary of State is having to respond to remarks that you've made, they got to go out and give a speech to rebuff what you said about them practicing racism. Oh, man, you are a huge concern for a racist man, racist woman, unless I'm misinformed. He continues, he says, again, showing the global reach in Hong Kong and China, them knowing about his efforts. Let's see. And in Haiti, 1946. I just mentioned the Moores Ford Bridge lynching. That happened in July 1946. They're talking right over that time period. I'd be a little bit surprised if Mr. Robeson, if he's talking about lynchings that happened at this time. He says it was there in September 1946 that Robeson vehemently charged that it was hypocritical for the U.S. to take the lead in the Nuremberg, indicting purveyors of race hatred while lethargically engaging the same at home. In my view, he would have had to have known about the Moores Ford Bridge lynching. That was veterans, black pregnant females. No way he could have missed that. He would have had to have known something about that. Let's see. We got another illustration. Global system, greater confinement is always the case. It was just after the meeting with Truman where I guess he got too sassy. Truman moved to circumscribe Robeson's globe-trotting, which was akin to cutting off his oxygen supply. Again, white people restricting his access. All right, Negro, we're not going to let you go to Canada. All right, Negro, we're not going to let you perform here. All right, in fact, we're going to take your whole passport. And we just keep taking and keep taking and keep taking. Sometimes it might even mean we're going to take your whole life. You do that too. Let's see. Next, he says... destroyed 10 or 11, 12 creative years, the most important years in his life. Robeson argued because he was a black leader, created more anger and even fear, but certainly anger in the white community, combined with the allegation that Robeson secretly wished to become the nation's black Stalin. Again, watch that name calling. He's a hardliner. He's a black Stalin. What does that mean? You just name calling? Once you get rolling name calling black people, it can take up a whole lot of momentum. And that fear, I just don't think that white people are fearful of black people. They can take that money away anytime they want. They can take that passport back anytime they want to. I just don't think that white people operate with fear. They operate with efficiency at mistreating black people and neutralizing potential threats. That's not the same as being afraid. Negro militancy in Detroit, that's what they said. I don't know what that is either. Detroit, looking at the last 50 years over that time period, I don't even know what that means. Negro militancy, that would have to be explained to me. Let's see. The automobile accident, I did not think this section was written well. It reads there, Robeson was involved in a perilous automobile accident, in quotes, but investigation revealed that 4 bolts had been removed from the lugs of a tire and a 5th mishandled intentionally. I think better language should be, again, if you have information about COINTELPRO and those type of deliberate efforts to have black people die under suspicious circumstances where it can look like an accident, or they can set it up where it looks like some other niggers did this, if you have that sort of context, then I think you can do, in my view, a more accurate job of using language to describe this. This is not a 5th mishandled intentionally. I think that could be stated more assertively. Evidence might suggest sabotage in an effort to cause an automobile accident. I'm sure there's a more forceful way that should be written. And it continues, preordaining that Robeson's car would be diverted dangerously from its intended course. I think there's a better way that sentence could be written. It almost sounds a little too jargony, too academic. It almost sounds like, I don't want to quite say pussyfooting, but man, I think it could have been written better. None of that's in quotes. Continuing, that is, only 1 bolt was found on the hubcap, meaning that others had been removed and the cap placed in such a way as to conceal this defect. I don't know. Let's see. Continuing in the same paragraph, now he's quoting Robeson. This is all a quote. I have been threatened with death 2 or 3 times, and this incident may have been foremost in his mind. Mrs. Robeson was said to fear killers, adding, each night before I go to bed, I put a broad-bladed hunting knife under my pillow along with a portable burglar alarm. The police have turned down my request for a gun permit, but I'm terrified, she added tremulously, that somebody might try to avenge themselves on me. Now, when she says she's afraid, she's terrified, I believe it. Her saying, Mrs. Robeson, saying that she's afraid compared to white people saying that they are fearful or frightened about Mr. Robeson or any other black person, what they're saying or doing in response to racism, it's not comparable at all. We're talking 20 years before Dr. King was killed, about a little less than a decade before Emmett Till. Oh, yeah. Whole house could have been killed. Dr. Harry T. Moore down in Florida, he and his wife were killed about a decade before they were bombed down in Florida. Oh, yeah. They could have been killed at any time. And just think about that. I go to sleep every night with a hunting knife, a broad-bladed hunting knife under my pillow. Think about that. For black mental health. That's where your state of mind is, where you feel in order to have a little bit of safety, I got to sleep with a broad-blade hunting knife near my pillow for safety purposes, and how that impacts your marriage. Think back to the last chapter. They talked about all that weight that Paul Robeson gained. They hear all the time, they talk about the impact of stress. All that cortisol in your body might make you eat less where you're skipping meals, lose a lot of weight, might make you eat more where you gain a lot of weight. People have different responses to stress. Sometimes you get both, just depending on the time period. But imagine that. You're facing threats. Car goes off the road. People are sabotaging your car, sabotaging your money. Wife is sleeping with a knife under the bed. You're home 10 days a week. You might be drinking cigarettes, drinking a whole fifth, eating a whole quarter gallon of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, anything. Let's see. Did the same thing to Muhammad Ali. Can take your best years away like that. Let's see. They said the police entered the hall and sought aggressively for this is in Virginia, Coon man. They said the police aggressively sought to enforce the state segregation law by demanding that those defined as white. I thought that was so crucial. Those defined as white. That's what the racial classifications are. You're not white like the color. It's you are defined, classified as white. And what does that mean? Very important. It says not sit next to those defined, but not a single white person moved, though one Negro was arrested for failing to follow police orders. They said that this happened a few times. Again, Mr. Robeson could have just complied with all this, kept his mouth shut, made his money, no big deal. Last one I'll get in, let's see. The concentration of power and wealth and white supremacy rule in South Africa represent a threat not only to the whole of Africa, but to India, Asia, and the entire non-white world, including, he added pointedly, Negro America. Again, having a non-white person with that type of global grasp of the system and talking at this point about what's happening in South Africa, I don't even think Nelson Mandela was known outside the continent at this point. We read Long Walk to Freedom in the 1940s. Like, whoa. I mean, they were having protests and things in the 1960s, but 1940s, I don't think you had a whole lot of black people talking about, whoa, the niggers over there are being mistreated in South Africa. We should do something about that. These Afrikaners are, terrorists. I don't think that was happening. I mean, way, way ahead of the curve, as they say. We will call it a broadcast there. I am going to run across the street, and we will get ready to switch and do a different book. As I said, I'll try to record if I'm able to do so. I will upload and share, so there'll be 2 podcasts, the book club from today, and then the book signing that I'm about to attend, Azor Savage, about the Seattle school system practicing white supremacy racism, same problem Mr. Robeson attempted to address. Much obliged for everyone's participation. I hope it was worthy of your Thursday evening. We will be here on Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, for Neutralizing Workplace Racism. Tune in. If you have suggestions, problems, we'll be here sharing constructive info. Thanks again for all's participation. I'll say it again because it was mentioned, Mr. Robeson. The cigarettes, the alcohol, sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. Let's take as best care of our health as we possibly can. That is a core component, a primary component of countering white supremacy, racism. In addition to being sober, let's be buckled up every time we are in a vehicle, passenger or driver, again, doing all we can to be as safe as possible under extraordinarily dangerous conditions. In addition to being buckled up, not on that cell phone if we are behind the wheel, doing everything we can to minimize contact with the Amber Geigers, Daniel Holtzclaws of the known universe. With that, Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.